All right. As people just join, I'm going to just introduce myself and our presenters today. So my name's Jess, and I'm our NAC coordinator here at NKCDC. And so we host these service area briefings. We do about four a year, and we like to cover a bunch of different topics. And today we have presenters from Victim Advocates and Philly Legal Aid here to talk to us a little bit about navigating domestic violence situations and kind of just some general basics of navigating those situations, and also some legal assistance, some ways that you can get some legal assistance navigating those types of situations. So we're going to start out by hearing from JR from Victim Advocates and Karen Laird. Karen Laird.
Hi, my name is JR Waltemyer. This is my coworker, our director of training, Karen Laird. And we're going to talk to you today a little bit about domestic violence, what it looks like, what you can expect to see. And then some sources of referral in case you do happen to come across this, or you have some clients that come across this and need some assistance. And we're going to answer every question that you have and make sure that this is more about learning what you need and meeting those needs and making sure you have the tools that your clients need to be safe and successful. So let's talk about domestic violence just a little bit. This is not, I wanted to start very basic because we have a diverse crowd today, and I want to make sure that we all have a certain understanding moving forward. We all have some preconceived notions about what domestic violence are, but I want to make sure we all start off on the same baseline. And so we're talking about violence that occurs in the home. Typically, it's an interpartner relationship, or what's called a sanguineous relationship. It'd be a relationship that involves a blood relationship, mother, father, mother, son, mother, daughter, father, daughter, that sort of thing. But the violence takes a lot of different looks, and that's why I wanted to speak to set this baseline today. So we all know what violence looks like, physical violence. There are a lot of other tactics and techniques that domestic violence abusers utilize to compromise the safety of their partners, and to keep them under their control. The one thing that I really want you to remember about domestic violence today is that the violence is a byproduct. The violence is what happens when that control is challenged, when that control the offender feels that control slipping away. He uses that violence to reestablish that control, and to really make sure that his word is followed. And I'm sorry, I'm using he pronouns. I beg your pardon. When I did my master's degree, my bachelor's degree, all the literature was he, because offenders tended to be he, at least at that point in time, according to literature. I'm trying to change those things, but those changes have come slow for me. I beg your pardon. So I do recognize that women can be offenders, and that men can be victims as well. So please forgive me if I offended you at all. So again, to get back to the tactics, the violence is a byproduct, the physical violence. There are techniques like isolation and pulling you away from your family and your friends, economic control, not allowing you to work outside of the home, making sure you have no money at all ever, checking every penny in terms of receipts in the checkbook. There's control that's exercised through children. That's a really big source of control. And housing, because a lot of times if you have given up economic control with somebody, you don't have the money to pay for rent. You may not have credit that allows you to go out and apply for housing or qualify for housing. You may never have been through the process before and not understand it. So there's a lot more than just violence, and particularly a lot more that we see that doesn't qualify as violence, but is domestic violence. It's control. I mean, offenders are very careful about not allowing the public and professionals like us to see this. If they did, they'd be incarcerated. They give up control. They don't like that. And so their violence often occurs behind closed doors. Their violence often occurs outside of the public eye. What we get to see those other aspects of control. We get to see the hairy eyeball, as a lot of people have called it. We get to hear harsh words. We get to hear the put downs. We get to see the jealousy. And those are the things I encourage you to just kind of keep an eye out for. And biggest thing that I can share with you in terms of, if you come across this and you have concerns, um, please feel free to make appropriate referrals. I think the biggest reason that we're all here today, right now, is because we want to make sure we know each other, we trust each other, and that we have the ability to send clients back and forth to one another when that would be beneficial to the client. And if you remember nothing else about me today, I want you to remember that you can reach out to me at any point in time, about any victimization at all, particularly domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. That's what I've done for the last 20 years, is work with victims of those crimes. Worked both at the district attorney's level as victim witness coordinator of the stop unit in York, and I currently work at the Office of Victim Advocate with Karen, where I manage the address confidentiality program. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about those referrals. I know there's going to be some information that's disseminated here today. I certainly, if you look at the chat right now, you'll see my information. I very much encourage you to take that information. The 800 number will get directly to OVA. The email address comes directly to me. Whatever you and your client are most comfortable with, please reach out. Our jobs in the system, we work with offenders, victims whose offenders are incarcerated at state level, who are on state parole or on state probation. So typically at the county level, there are a number of different organizations and agencies that do victim services. So clients will come into contact with them when the case is going through the county court level. And once that case is sentenced, if that offender is sentenced to state prison, if they're sentenced to state parole, state probation at all, then they come up to us. One point that I really need to make about that is we're very dependent upon local resources to help clients sign up for the Office of Victim Advocate. Unlike the local system, which is an opt-in, not an opt-in system, it's an automatic system. We are an opt-in system. You absolutely, as a client, if you would like to continue to receive notifications, which I think are really, really super important for safety purposes, if you want to receive those after your offender goes to state prison, you're going to need to register with us, and you're going to need somebody to help you do that in terms of pointing you in the right direction. So that's where we rely on our local brothers and sisters who work at local victim service agencies, in Philadelphia and other counties across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You can also send clients directly to our website at the Office of Victim Advocate, and you'll see registration information that the client can fill out and submit on their own if they prefer to do so. While you're on our website, we have links to county resources. Again, more information about the referrals that I was talking about a minute ago. We have referral links for every county. We have Victim Witness, which would be the victim service providers that are based in the local DA's offices. And then we have, thank you, Karen. And then we also have links to domestic violence and sexual assault agencies that are community-based, located in each county that has them. We try to maintain close contact with most of those agencies, including some of your sister agencies here in Philadelphia. I can tell you that as late as December of last year, before COVID, of course, struck travel down, I was in Philadelphia training a couple of agencies. We do the best we can to maintain contact with our victim service agencies that are at the local level as much as we can. Having a honest relationship and great rapport with them is vital to making sure that our victims are safe throughout the continuity of victimization and moving through the state system. So on our website that Karen posted, I encourage you to take a look around. You'll see a number of those referral sources that I'm talking about here. And you'll also see a number of other programs that we offer. Since we are talking a lot about housing here today and we're talking about domestic violence, I really want you to take a look at the address confidentiality program. That is the program here that I'm responsible for at OVA, and the program that I'm most proud of. I'm not proud of it because I represent it. I'm proud of it because I think we really bust our rear end to make it work. And because even when I was at the local level and working with DV victims every day that were going through the court process, I recognize the value of the program then. And I'm very, very proud of the fact that the victim that I referred first to this program is still in the program right now. I'm sorry that she has to be, but it really pleases me to know that I made that referral and she's seen enough value in the program to remain in the program for years. I hate that she's had to, like I said before, that's really stinky. But I can't control that. What I can control is that the program has got value that she sees and chooses to utilize as part of her safety plan. That means the world to me. And I think it'll mean the world to some of your clients as well. So the address confidentiality program is set up by Commonwealth law. That's a surprise to some people because it is law. A lot of judges will tell you, well, that program's not real. I'm going to tell them the same thing and you can tell them the same thing that I tell not only judges but cops and lawyers all across the Commonwealth, and that's please open up that big book that sits on your desk called the Westlaw book, because I can give you a statutory quotation. It is on our website. It's on almost every letter I send. It tells everybody who knows how to use Westlaw exactly what the address confidentiality program is, exactly what the law empowers it to do, and exactly what your requirements are once you know that address is confidential. I think there's a lot of power in the law. And I think that particularly coming from a systems-based advocacy, which I did, I'm a little more fearless about approaching judges and lawyers and cops because honestly, it's all I've done for the last 20 years. So I'm not intimidated to go in front of them or to speak with them on the phone or email or whatever, and to share with them the statute and make sure that they understand that they've got to abide by it too, unless they want to issue a court order. So what our program does is it allows victims to use our post office box in Harrisburg, and it provides a first-class mail forwarding service. We'll forward anything that's not a package or a magazine to whatever address in the country that they want us to forward it to. The reason I say country is we do allow out-of-state participation. There are 38 programs that have 38. There are 38 address confidentiality programs in the country. 37 states, including PA, and the District of Columbia has a program. So there are at least 12 states that do not have programs. And so as a result, we are the only state that allows out-of-state participants in our program. We have clients as far away as California that utilize a Harrisburg post office box address and get their mail forwarded across the country 5 days a week. Our office touches just the address confidentiality program. We touch anywhere from 500 to 5,000 pieces of mail a day. We forward them 5 days a week. You can let your clients know. I'm very proud of this. Our turnaround time is less than 24 hours. We receive mail at 11 o'clock in the morning. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it is repackaged and ready to go out the next day with mail. That happens 5 days a week. Even with COVID, there were 2 days that the governor did not allow us in our building. Those are the only 2 days that we have ever gone without processing mail, at least since I've been part of the program. I'm really, really, really proud of that because myself and Adele, who is the administrative person who works for the program, we really think that that's a big safety feature for our clients because they're still receiving timely mail, still receiving timely court orders, timely checks, everything that we all need to survive. And they're doing so with an umbrella that protects anybody from knowing where they're at, including the offender, particularly the offender. There's a lot else that the program offers that we can talk about further individually, but that's the basics of the address confidentiality program. I encourage you to take a look at it and become comfortable with it. And if you have questions about it, reach out to me. Let me know what you need to talk about. I'll give you as much time as you want. And my goal is always, at the end of the day, that you're as comfortable with the program as I am so that you can start referring it. And I don't do that because, it helps me. I don't get paid on a commission basis. We get paid, period. If there were only 2 people in the program, I'd do a hell of a lot less work and I'd make the same amount of money. Man, maybe I should just shut up and go away now, huh? No, just kidding. No, I really love what I do. And again, you can see that in the effort that the people that work for this program put forward for it. So feel free to refer us at any point in time or to ask further questions. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. I went through this quickly specifically because I know there are questions people die to ask that they never ask because it's intimidating. Well, now's the time. There's not a question at all that I'll judge you for. And there's not an answer at all that I won't give you. The only precursor that I give you is don't ask a question that you don't really want to know the answer to, because if you ask me the question, I'm going to give you the honest answer, I promise, even if it's not a comfortable one, okay? So please feel free to ask anything.
You can also write your questions in the chat and I can read them out for people.
That would be great too, yeah.
I guess I'll ask a question.
Please.
What's our best way to kind of start just as a community and as an organization to kind of start having these conversations? Because I think it's something that we try to like tiptoe around. So like, do you have any recommendations for that? Just how we can start?
Absolutely. So there are two.
Safely with the community.
I absolutely think so. So there are a couple things that I've been part of in my community that I think have really increased awareness, and I've been very proud of the efforts. And so I'm going to start when I was working at the county level. There were two things that I felt really strengthened my community's response. You know, in the 90s and the early 2000s, York County was, and I'm not saying this because I was part of it or because I still live here. I'm saying it because it was true, and we were told it by many people outside of the agencies. York County was a model across the state for the way that it responded to particularly domestic violence homicide. And I think that the strength of the county was the fact that we all came together as a group as often as possible. The York County Domestic Violence Task Force was formed in the mid to late 90s, and it brought together professionals from every walk of life. We had business people there, we had police officers, district magistrates, lawyers, a representative from the defense bar, ADAs were there, judges showed up. The police chiefs were there some of the times and had representatives there when they weren't there. And we all came together with representatives from the healthcare community, from housing. The Community Progress Council was always there. They were really close allies with us because, man, they really helped me with housing referrals. But all these like-minded people came together for the purpose of identifying the problem, trying to augment existing awareness, and to try to make sure that we were, as a community, being as proactive as possible with this problem. So the first part was coming together, and that allowed us all to educate one another. We got comfortable with each other. So to the point where, as a great example, Chief Tom Gross was chief of York Area Regional Police. He's now the chief of the Fraternal Order of Police Chiefs Association, I believe, here in Pennsylvania. Tom, to this point, if I wanted to call him, I could, because we sat in the same room together, we broke bread together, we know one another, we trust one another, and we know the integrity that each of us possess. And so that rapport that we try to establish with our clients, it is equally important to establish that with one another. And so here within the community, I'm going to encourage you to as a group, start coming together and start trying to identify other people that you think may have a role in this. Don't miss anybody. Lions Club, the Rotary, that kind of thing. We brought all those people to the table whenever possible, and we sent invitations, and we had them come in. We had one meeting a month. We would talk about what things were looking like on a domestic violence basis. Everybody would go around the table and try to contribute to solutions for problems. The group could bring problems to the table. And sometimes it was just good enough to have an education piece where we were increasing the awareness of all the facets of domestic violence for everybody around that table, who would then disseminate it out to their troops. So I think the more that you can bring people together that are in the beginning, professionals. Don't forget clergy. We always had clergy there. I think they're really important. So bring them together, introduce one another, make sure that you're on a talking basis, exchange cards, shake hands. Well, obviously not right now, but start developing that community again. I think that's a big thing that's lost in even our policing, and we saw the unrest this summer. Community policing only works when we really are in the community. And I think that the Domestic Violence Task Force in York was a great example of the community coming together to help police itself. Obviously, we didn't enforce anything, but we were able to take that information out to make sure we all knew what domestic violence looked more like as opposed to what we see on TV, right? Because it doesn't look like that very often. And then the third thing, the extension of that then is once you have those partners, you can begin to put that information out. So as the Domestic Violence Task Force, we began with because there were dues eventually, we would ask everybody's agency to contribute some money to the operating costs of the Domestic Violence Task Force. And we use those dues to help bring in speakers of a national flavor who were able to do things that we weren't able to, perhaps, or that we were not the best experts for. So the best example I can give you is we did a wonderful, after a huge spate of domestic violence homicides one summer, we really were trying hard to push local police to buy into lethality assessment. So we brought Dr. Jackie Campbell in to do a education piece in the community, and we, of course, we brought people in. Now we were able to steer some of those tickets to certain police agencies that we really knew we wanted on board for this, but we also allowed the community to come, and we allowed other partners. Probation, parole came, and we had somebody from state parole, who I work for now. We had them in. We had a judge again. We had some business people. All these people came in to see Jackie Campbell because we invited them and because we made sure they knew why we thought it was important, and therefore that made it important for them. So that's the extension of that. Once you get to know each other, you become comfortable with one another, you educate one another, and then you take that education outside. So wherever you are in that continuity, that's figure out what the next step for that is. And I believe, as far as I know, y'all, you're in the middle of that right now. So I think probably the next step would be to bring in a few more community partners, maybe from law enforcement, or get that task force moving along a little bit, and then identify some areas that the community needs to know more about, just like you're doing now for this small knit community of us, right? You'll do that on a larger level. It's exactly what you're doing right now, Jess. It's perfect.
And Jessica, I wanted to just add in some other ideas that might be helpful for housing counselors in particular. So I think what JR said was really helpful in that, like, DV looks very different. DV is about power and control. And a lot of times survivors have a difficulty self-identifying because what they see in the media might not be the reality that they're living. So I want to give you just a few questions that I find helpful when speaking with survivors. So I'm reading off a list because I don't have them memorized. So if you see my eyes dart away. So I think we always want to start out with the idea that if you tell me something, I will believe you. Because it's so hard to air your problems to a stranger. So if you tell me something, I will believe you. The other thing that I think is important to mention is, so some of the questions are, everyone argues or fights with his or her partner or spouse. Are you ever afraid that that fight will escalate? Are you afraid of the consequences of that argument? And I got these from my colleague got these from a law review article. So, but we use them when we ask a survivor, are you a survivor of DV? And they say no. Because again, they're thinking physical violence, but it can take on a lot of different forms. So do you feel, the blanket question of, do you feel your partner treats you well? These open-ended questions will get a lot of different responses. And it's good to kind of ask that open-ended, do you feel safe at home? Has your partner ever tried to keep you from taking medication or from seeking medical care? Does your partner refuse to let you sleep at night? Has your partner ever hurt your pet or destroyed any of your objects? Sometimes many people don't understand the links between our pets and domestic violence, but it's a huge indicator that violence is happening in a household or will escalate quickly. Asking about basic jealousy, because one of the things that we know is offenders will try to isolate the survivor. Yeah, I can send those questions to you as well, and I can throw them in the chat. That's probably more helpful than me reading from them. But I'll do that. Let me see if there's any other good ones that are there
any, I guess maybe for NKCDC and our health workers and just anybody who's working with members of our community, are there any questions or I guess that are maybe less leading, that we can start to kind of have this conversation without being let's talk about domestic violence, like for our housing counselors who might see some of this come through but are unsure?
Is there anything at your home that makes you feel unsafe? Because that doesn't necessarily imply a human being. It could imply simply the neighborhood I'm living in. It could imply the fact that there's lead paint on the walls or whatever. I think it opens the door without necessarily pushing you through it at all. Because as Gabby said, they're going to be, a lot of people are going to be very hesitant to talk about this, particularly until rapport is very well established.
Right. That's
And
helpful. Thank you.
The way so I'm going to try to paste some of my questions in, but they look a little funny. I don't know if I'm missing some or if the chat box was not large enough. I think the reality is when you're speaking to a survivor, though, it's like hard to skirt around the issue. And I think for survivor empowerment, the survivor needs to know that, you know, they're speaking to someone who is asking them a question about their safety and sort of the limitations in their own confidentiality, because housing counselors are not it's not a confidential relationship. And I think the understanding of, if you tell me this, I can give you more information about the DV hotline or different agencies to reach out to. I think it's important so that I don't know if a housing counselor would necessarily want to be inundated with the information that someone trained in domestic violence would receive.
Yeah.
Yes, I have something quick to add. Our office does have a program that's called Resilient Voices. And so we have a large group of individual victims and survivors who are speakers and who will speak in different events. And sometimes I mean, we utilize these speakers. They're victims and survivors of all crimes. We do have a lot of domestic violence speakers. And I think what's helpful is sometimes, especially if you're talking about the people that work with the housing counselors, they may have never heard anyone speak on domestic violence. And so I do think sometimes it's beneficial to utilize one of these speakers to have them even listen to someone's story and have someone share their personal story so they can see from start to finish. You know, I think there's this misnomer that, you know, domestic violence relationships start off bad. Well, no one's going to enter into a relationship that's bad from the beginning. And so a lot of our speakers talk about how their relationship began and then what changes occurred. Because I think that understanding and actually hearing from a survivor themselves could be just as educational as reading literature or whatnot, because they're going to hear point blank from someone who's lived it and survived it and gone through the process what they did. So if you ever want a speaker to maybe that can be like an in-service training, they've gotten really good doing it Zoom. So if you would like anybody, please let me know. I'll be happy to set you up with some of our survivors that'll be happy to do that.
And we have another question too for you, JR.
Shoot.
Hi, JR. So
Hi.
So my question is about trying to aid victims in engaging with resources. I know one part of it is having the resources accessible and sort of understandable, but the other portion is trying to figure out how to engage someone who is, you know, kind of in survival mode as everything's happening and as they're experiencing this trauma. I think there's just so many things that you're trying to navigate all at once that the idea of accessing another program like address confidentiality program might just feel like something that is so much more to your like very full plate. So how do you navigate situations like that where you know something could be beneficial, but that person is kind of trying to just, you know, get through it?
I understand. So I'm a geek. I paid attention in college and graduate school because I really loved what I was learning about. And I try to apply it as often as possible because I see the wisdom in other people's words. And when it comes to services, I always look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If it's something that we're required for survival, and you know, one of the examples that I'm going to tie in with that is going to be, you know, keeping that address confidential. You know, that your stalker as a survivor or victim. You know your stalker a lot better than I do. I know stalkers really, 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 really well. probably better than I ever thought I would or should. But at that same point, you know that person better than I do. So if you believe that having your address protected is a matter of safety and survival, then they're going to recognize the validity in that. They're going to seek me. So I when I'm working directly with a client and they call often in trauma and in crisis, the first thing that I of course do is, old school victim service provider, let them vent, ventilation, validation, listen, reflect back, make sure that I understand. And once I understand, in my head, I'm making an informal assessment of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is it that they need to be able to talk to me again tomorrow? What is it that they need again to be able to work on the next step next week? And I start trying to slowly inundate them with that stuff. I say slowly inundate. I know that that's a very that's a oxymoron, but that's exactly what you have to do. They need the information. They need it for survival. And so I'm going to begin to give them that information. Now, these days, there's a really big benefit to COVID. And that's because a lot of us these days are not able to see people directly anymore. So a lot of the communication I'm having with victims is going to be via email. And even though we know there's difficulty with people who are in crisis in terms of processing information, having it written down, having the ability to see it, having the ability for us to be able to refer back to it when it comes time to later emails, later phone calls, I think that's really been a benefit to my clients who were deepest in crisis because they have it written down. It's not something we talked about over the phone. They're not jamming to find the notes they took. So we talk slowly. If you're following the guidelines in that are published for victim service provision, we're told to make sure that everything that we send out in writing is at a 6th grade reading level. And I think that part of that is not only because people come from all backgrounds, but I think another part of that is because when you're in crisis, the easier it is to understand, the better. The better the chances are that you're going to understand it. So provide things in writing when you can. When there are situations where you do know the person you're referring to, make sure you tell people how much you value. Great example. Very recently, I had a client who needed to relocate in the Allegheny region. I have a very close friend who's an advocate in that way, and I reached out to her and I explained the need. They saw the need right away, and when I reached out to my client, because I can't, make that application for them. When I reached out to my client, I said, I want you to know I trust this person. I want you to know that this person I value their service. I've worked with them in the past. And while I can't guarantee you that they're not going to let us down this time, they have not let me down in the past. I said those things because they were true. I think that the faith that we pass along to our clients in terms of other professionals greatly enhances their comfort level and the chances that they are going to reach out to any other referral sources. I'm also going to throw the converse of that coin out there to you. If there are agencies who have not earned your trust, I do think you owe it to your client at that point, and you owe it to the therapeutic relationship you develop with them and you'll continue to develop with them. You owe it to them to perhaps withhold that, or to, let's face it, you can certainly couch it in such a way that you're not dogging anybody or bad mouthing anybody or starting any turf wars. But at the same point, you get your point across. I hate that it has to be that way, but I can't vouch for other people's professionalism. I can simply adjust my behavior based upon it. Does that all make sense?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to read a follow-up question from Fridley. So she asked, are there situations when victims are in the program but may backtrack to their abusers who have not been put away? How do you guys continue to provide resources while counseling them through the situation?
So it's a little less frequent now that I'm with ACP. By the time that you get to ACP, you're long gone. Now, when I worked at the county level, everybody who's ever worked at the local level, worked direct, provided direct service to domestic violence victims. we all know that there's that, well, for want of a better term, there's a yo-yo effect to some degree. And let's not forget about the reasons why. Okay, I think that's really important for us to remember. You know, certainly not least is love. You know, you loved your abuser at one point. Abusers don't just walk up first date and backhand you and say, you're coming home with me. If they did, there are very few times they get a second date. Instead, they are very crafty at making you fall in love with them. They present as a different person. You fall in love with that person. And the worst part is, just like in Vegas, when you hit on that quarter and you get $20 in your hand and you spend all $20 plus another $500 trying to get another $20 back in hand, with that abuser, you are constantly looking for that love that you saw. And so that's not the least of the reasons, but that certainly is a reason. And then the other reasons that we've talked about here, you know, the fact that you may not have the money to leave, the fact that your pets, you may not be able to take them and you know he's going to kill your pets, the children, all those things that lead you to go back. So I have to, as a victim advocate, I have to understand those things. By understanding them, I can try to help deal with them as proactively as possible. As an example, pets. One of the biggest reasons people don't leave. Honestly, I mean, you might have heard my dog jingling around here a few moments ago when he was walking down the stairs where I'm at. I couldn't leave without him. I know I couldn't. He's my best friend. My wife probably just had chest pains. Anyway, she's my best friend, but he's my best furry friend. How's that? I could not leave without him. And I'll tell you that when we look at lethality assessments, one of the most lethal indicators is violence against pets. Men and women who are violent against pets are violent against human beings, often lethal against human beings. And so I understand not wanting to leave that pet. So one of the things that I know when you have a pet is I have to figure out pet care. Not every county has that availability, but in York, again, one of the things that the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team and the DV Task Force was able to get done was we reached out to the ASPCA and we were able to get some pets from DV situations in shelter short term. We also had them develop a foster parent program for pets, so that you were able to have your pet placed for periods of up to 6 months with a loving family that had been evaluated by the ASPCA as safe, specifically so you could get out of a domestic violence situation, get yourself established in a place that you could have pets in again, and not lose your pet to your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. So I think that's a big part of preventing that cycle from happening, identifying it, understanding it, and starting to work proactively against some of those reasons why people come back, like making sure they have great housing, making sure that their housing is safe in good neighborhoods with good schools, you know, all those things. And then the other thing is I acknowledge it with my clients. You know, ma'am or sir, you know, and again, I don't use ma'am or sir, but I use names. I can't use a name right now, but my conversation's always been, look, I want you to understand, I'm not the love police. I'm not here to break up your relationship. I'm not telling you they're bad people. I'm not telling you anything at all about them. Instead, what I'm going to tell you is that behavior is not really acceptable. That behavior needs to be adjusted, and we want to adjust it so that if you do intend to stay, that you can do so safely. And if you don't intend to stay, that the next relationship he establishes doesn't experience the same thing or worse. You know, ma'am, help me save him from himself. If he ends up killing somebody, he's going to go to jail long term. I just want to help prevent that from happening for him and for you. So, you know, a lot of times just developing that therapeutic relationship and being there to discuss the ramifications of going back and the alternatives to going back, you know, just presenting options. I think a lot of times people return because they have no further option. Good question.
Okay, thank you so much, JR. Those were great. That was great information, and it's almost 2:15, so I think we're gonna ask Gabby from Philly Legal Aid to start her presentation now.
Great. Let me just.
And JR's information is all in the chat. So if you have more questions that are, you feel comfortable talking to him about, you can reach out, I'm sure, to him.
Please.
It's also in the chat on our Facebook. So if that's easier for you to access. Gabby's information is also in the chat.
It is. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for being here and for letting me talk about something that I'm very passionate about, which is sort of like know your rights for domestic violence survivors. So I would treat this presentation as like a brief overview of the different options that exist. So I work at Philadelphia Legal Assistance. We are the legal services funded corporation provider of free legal services in Philadelphia. So the information I'm going to provide is specific to Philadelphia. All right. It is legal information and it should not be taken as legal advice. It's my legal disclaimer. So the options that we're going to be talking about today are listed. Protection, we're going to be talking briefly about protection from abuse order, custody, support, public benefits, how to terminate a lease. I'm not going to talk about ACP because JR knows a lot more than I do, so it doesn't make sense for me to kind of go back through that. And I'll briefly touch on VCAP. And you can use the chat box if you have a question. I think there's going to be plenty of time at the end for us to sort of discuss these topics. Here are some local Philadelphia specific resources. So the first number is the DV hotline. It's a number that is available 24 hours a day. Please jot it down if you feel like it will help a survivor. The second number is the number to reach my office. We have our hotline runs Monday through Friday from 9:30 until 12 o'clock. And the number is listed there, 215-981-3838. That number is staffed by our paralegals. When someone calls our office, we do a quick eligibility assessment, and then you're scheduled for an intake with a paralegal, and then we review your case for representation. If it is an emergency, it'll get put on more of a fast track. This third number is the DV filing unit. So, and that is the Family Court of Philadelphia's DV filing unit. So if you are interested in filing for a temporary protection order, with COVID and the court closures or court modifications associated with that, that is the number you would use. They are available from Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you call after 11 o'clock approximately, you will likely receive a call back the next day in order to complete the paperwork to file that protection order. If you need an emergency protection order, you must go to the CJC, which is at 13th and Filbert in the basement. They are available for processing emergency PFAs from 4 p.m. until 8 a.m. in the morning and 24 hours a day on the weekends. So it's really important to know that information, again, with the COVID closures, because you cannot just go to the courthouse like you could have done a few months ago. I do see that there's some, I don't know if there are questions and we want to leave them to the end or if they're just, and I can
I was just putting those numbers in the chat.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go next to this is what survivors and litigants faced when they went to Philadelphia in order to get information about, their proceeding. The building was essentially closed and continues to be closed. So part of this information is to give you new information about how to access the court with the social distancing and the closures that have had to occur. So I'm going to talk briefly about protection from abuse orders. Again, this is brief information. I can't stress enough, if you have additional questions, please just give us a call. Because everything legal is so fact specific. That it's really important to have someone actually hear what you're saying, put it through the legal boxes and kind of give you a really good description of what to expect. So some of the common myths with protection orders or safety in general is that, the only remedy is to seek criminal justice. And so I wanted to just explain PFAs briefly as the idea that there are civil options. You could file a PFA against someone. In that petition, you would request that they not abuse, stalk, harass you, or continue to threaten violence against you. In addition, you could request or prevent any contact that includes social media or any third-party contact. And you could request eviction or exclusion of the defendant from your home. Okay, the violations of that may result in indirect criminal contempt or private action of contempt. I think it's so important to realize that there are civil options, because I think people have had mixed experiences with the criminal justice system. And I think people should understand that this is their own private action. That action would literally be plaintiff, your name, versus this defendant, and you completely control that cause of action. And so when we work under this client empowerment model, if a client decides they want to proceed with the final order, of course they can decide. If they change their mind, they can always withdraw. It's completely their decision. A little bit about sort of the basics that I'm not going to have enough time to really flesh out, but I think are important to understand. You have to have a qualifying relationship to the offender. So you want to think household members, family members, household and family members, or family and household members, excuse me. People that you're related to, intimate, current or former partners, children, siblings, parents. And you have to allege that the offender abused the survivor. The statute itself defines abuse. Obviously, physical abuse would count. And you should look, so again, if you have questions about whether you qualify, that's a question that you should ask PLA. So please give us a call. To submit the petition, so earlier in the slide I provided like how, but I kind of want to give you a little bit more of what happens next. So you would file the petition with the court. You would have a brief hearing before a judge in which the offender would not be present. And then you would be scheduled for a final hearing within 10 days. At that 10-day hearing, you must be able to provide an affidavit of service indicating that the offender, or the defendant in this case, did receive notice of the proceeding. And you would again put on your evidence as to why you meet the qualifying relationship, the abuse that occurred, and why you need the PFA to prevent future harm. I see like blinking, and I don't know if those are questions or again, just information. Okay, pardon me.
We can hold all of the questions. If any do come up, we'll just hold them till the end if that's easier.
That's easier for me. Thank you so much. All right. So I want to focus or kind of refocus our discussion a little bit to the housing component. So again, what I mentioned is that you can request in the petition that the defendant be evicted or excluded from your premises. That is assuming that you are on the deed of the house or that you are a tenant, listed as a tenant of this apartment or rental. If you are not listed as a tenant or a co-owner of this place, you will need to be able to show that the offender has a legal duty to provide support to you. So those exist with spouses and co-parents. The other things that you could ask for within the PFA, and it's when you look at the petition for a PFA, it's a pretty standard form. They all look the same, and you literally will just check the box of the specific remedy you're seeking. So you could require the defendant or request that the defendant provide you or the minor children with other suitable housing. You can ask for temporary support, including rent or mortgage payments. This is a new enactment or item that you could put in, but you could ask that the police accompany you to serve the PFA as soon as you get the PFA. If you believe that there's risk associated with any lag time of service and any additional relief. So
and I just want to sorry, I did want to mention really quickly, there is some confusion about some of the acronyms, and I know that I'll get confused with them too. So if we can just try not use acronyms as much as possible. I know we do it all the time once we're comfortable.
We'll try. I'll try, but you'll probably have to stop me. All right. So PFAs, I don't know if I'll try going forward. I don't remember which ones I used. Alrighty. So that's kind of my brief discussion of PFAs. Again, if you have questions, please reach out. So I'm going to talk briefly about custody. I think one of the other misnomers that exist is that you must stay in this relationship with your co-parent of your child, or you will lose your child, or they will sometimes lord over the fact that they will use your child against you and use that relationship to further control you. And what I want to say about custody orders are, a custody order describes the parent and other guardian's legal relationship to the child. It factors in 16 best interests of the child custody factors that will and a judge or master will decide where a child should be living and who has legal custody of the child. The process can take a very long time. There are a few ways to get a custody order. The normal track would be a custody complaint. If you believe your child is in imminent harm, you could seek an emergency custody order. And in addition, you could ask for a temporary order within a PFA or a protection from abuse order. If you plan on moving, it is imperative that you file a notice of relocation before 60 days of your move, if that move would impact the other parent's custodial rights or significantly impact that parent's custodial rights. So I'm going to go now to support. One of the myths that exist is what we hear very often is an offender will tell a survivor that if they leave them, they will not provide them with any financial support. And I'm here to tell you that there are different ways to look at that, not different ways. That's not accurate. That survivor could file a support complaint. They could seek spousal support if they are in fact married, and they can also seek child support. There are a few ways to do that here. You could go to this website that I have listed and request support. There's the phone number that you can call. This is a Philly specific number, and you could file the complaint on the telephone. In addition, you can apply for public benefits at your county assistance office. There are specific public benefits that require you file a child support complaint. There are many reasons that you may not want to file a child support complaint if you fear that retaliation from the offender. And there is a DV verification form that you can use as an exception to filing that child support complaint. Okay, so I'm now going to go to terminating your lease. Sometimes people will stay in relationships because they have a lease together and they don't want to face the financial hit associated with breaking the lease. Here in Philadelphia, we're lucky in that as a local law, you can terminate a lease by providing your landlord with a letter. I included a hyperlink, but of course I didn't realize that with the screen share, you're not able to actually look at the hyperlink. But if you send a letter to your landlord, you can give that landlord 30 days notice, and then you can attach documentation of the domestic violence that occurred. That could be a police report, medical report, or a letter from a victim services organization, and you could terminate your lease and move within 30 days. There are additional protections that exist if someone is a recipient of Section 8 housing. In that situation, they can terminate the lease, they can separate the lease and remove the offender's name from the lease. And they provide additional protections if you want to move. So I'm going to go right now into Victim Compensation Assistance Program. This is a reimbursement program that exists for survivors. And I say reimbursement because it does have a little bit of a limiting effect because it assumes that you have sufficient funds to pay for items, and not everybody does. In order to qualify for VCAP, the crime had to occur in Pennsylvania. You reported the crime within 3 days, and report could be to the police department, or you filed for a protection order. that you continue to cooperate with the police, the courts, or VCAP, and that you have filed claims within 2 years, the claim or the request was filed within 2 years of the crime, and the victim was not involved in illegal activity. The reason I bring that up in our discussion, because it covers a variety of different expenses or reimbursement expenses, medical expenses, counseling, loss of earning, loss of support, funeral costs, travel costs, childcare. But specifically for today, it covers relocation. There are limits to each of those categories, and there is a total cap of $35,000. And then the next item was address confidentiality. I'm not going to talk about the program itself, but what I would like you to know is if you are filing a pleading with the court, you do not need to provide your address if you believe your address is confidential for safety reasons. So if you're filing a pleading and the section that asks you for your address, you should simply put confidential due to safety reasons. And I'm not going to say that will stand forever. But you should do that as an initial step and then argue that it should remain confidential if you need to, if the other side is arguing to find out your address. All right, so I know I went by that really fast, but I wanted to leave some sort of time for discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. So I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or concerns, or
If there are any questions for Gabby, you can write them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. I'm going to check the Facebook chat really quick.
Yeah, Gabby, this is Renee. Thank you so much. This is really helpful information. I know the legal process can be really confusing and there's a lot of detail involved. Can you talk at all about if there's domestic abuse and the two persons maybe rent together? You talked about the victim moving out and having the legal ability to do that. Can you talk about whether there's any legal ability to have your partner removed from the lease, have the abuser removed from the lease?
Sure. So Renee, if somebody brought that to my attention, I would ask if the housing is based on Section 8 housing, because the process would be a little bit more simple. They could actually go through the HUD process of having the offender removed without having to involve any sort of civil litigation. So it's a little bit simpler. If Section 8 housing was not applicable because they were not recipients, then we'd have to talk about filing for a PFA in order to have that person removed from the lease and from the premises. And so that conversation would be, when did the filing incident occur? So I'd ask it questions about how recent was the action, that is why they're filing, and then I would most likely assist them with a PFA or protection from abuse order if that is what they wanted to do. And then in that situation, so I'm gonna just keep talking unless you have additional questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. Please keep talking.
So what I would want them to know is we'll file the PFA, the protection from abuse order, and then that day, most likely you'll have an ex parte hearing. And that means that it's a hearing without the other side being present. So we would have that hearing. We would request that a temporary order that includes that the defendant is evicted and excluded from the premises be a part of that order. We would notify the plaintiff, the victim in the situation, would go to the courthouse between 4 and 5 to pick up the temporary order. We would advise this person to go to her local police department to have the defendant served immediately at the premises so that he was actually evicted and excluded. And then we would have to have a final hearing within 10 days to make sure that that order stuck in place. because there is always a risk or, I cannot guarantee that the order will become a final order, which is an unfortunate reality, but is 100% accurate. No one can guarantee that you're going to get a final order.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions, please reach out.
Hi, Gabby. I have another question. So I was wondering, in what situations does a temporary or emergency PFA remove an abuser from a living situation, and what are the limitations to this? I guess in which situations would you just kind of offhandedly know that this wouldn't be possible?
Yeah, so I might have missed a bit, but I also see it in the box. So we would always, if housing was at issue in the petition for the protection from abuse order, we would always ask for the eviction and the exclusion of the defendant from the premises. And then we would argue why it's necessary at the ex parte. I think the limitations exist in that if you are not a co-tenant to this premises, or you are not on the deed, you will have a hard argument for staying in the premises. One of the questions that is asked on the petition itself is your sort of right to the premises. So it will specifically ask whether you're on the deed, whether you're a co-tenant, whose name is on the apartment lease. And if those items don't factor in your favor, so if you're not a co-tenant, if you're not a co-owner of the premises, you'll need to argue that there's a legal reason that you should be allowed to stay there. So if you share children with the offender, that would be a reason. And I think that there's a secondary provision that says any other additional relief. So if it's not specifically clear that you should stay there, or you don't have a legal entitlement, I think it's important that you would still make the argument, because it's possible that a judge hearing sort of the equities at stake would grant it. Maybe not as a final remedy, but potentially at the temporary stage.
Okay, thank you. And then I actually just sent in another question. I typed it in, but I can read it aloud too. So what happens when a victim is seeking to renew a PFA? Are there any particular qualifications to extend it? I know that I believe 3 years is the maximum. So after that point, how do they go about that process?
Yeah, so thank you, Victoria. When we spoke on the phone, it was Victoria, but I see here it's Tori. So thank you for asking that. So it's really important that if a survivor is interested in extending the protection from abuse order, that they do so before the protection order expires. There are a few reasons why a protection from abuse order, a final order, can be extended. And I'm going to apologize in advance in case I forget them, because I always have to review the law to give someone to feel extremely confident. But off the top of my head, I know one of them includes that previous contempt occurred. So if someone violated the final order, that would be one of the bases for requesting an extension. And again, the violation could be a phone call. The violation does not mean that the person abused or stalked you. It could be simply a phone call. Whether it would be granted based on the basis of a phone call, again, I cannot tell you, or I can't guarantee that it would, but that would be enough of a reason to make the argument for why you were requesting that extension. Secondarily, if there's just reason to believe that this person, that you need it based on his or her behavior in the past. If the person, and this is the one that is relatively new, so I'd have to just double check to be very confident that I'm saying it right, but a new change was not so new, about a year ago, but that if the person is recently released from incarceration or is up for release in a few days, then they can request that extension. I'm not exactly sure on those timeframes though. I believe it's 90 days, but I don't feel confident telling you exactly that it's 90 days. I'd have to just take a quick look at the law.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Oh, and I see Cassandra's comment, or sorry, one of the persons, I'm sorry, I was using acronyms. I should give you my number and we can just chat.
We all do that once we're using them all the time. So I understand. Any other questions for JR or Gabby before we wrap up? I don't think so. Okay, so yeah, thank you both for, and you too, Karen, all of you for coming out and speaking with us today. I will, your numbers and your contact information is shared in the chat, but I will also put my email in the chat. And if people want to reach out to me, I can also connect them to you.
Perfect.
And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.